Okay, so the results. So the important bit. So let's just kind of break it down for you and go over it, and I'll tell you how I feel about it. So between July 27th, 2020 and November 14th, 2020, total of just over 44,000 people were screened, and just over 43,000 people over the age of 16 or at the age of 16 or older underwent randomization at 152 testing sites. So these are worldwide. So in the United States, Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Germany and Turkey. So while it says that it's a multinational trial, which it technically is, most of the sites are in the United States. So obviously, it's not surprising. Pfizer are an American giant in the pharmaceutical world. They have most of their sites in the United States, so therefore that's where they're primarily going to be doing their trial. But they do have a couple of other sites in other places. So I then want to show you this table. The table basically summarizes, says the demographic characteristics of the participants in the main safety population. So it's telling you what are the characteristics of the participants that they used, and explains the split both in terms of who got the vaccine and who got the placebo. So you've got different characteristics such as sex. So males and females are split pretty much down the middle. That is absolutely crucial because, like I said, vaccinations can or any drugs can affect women and men differently. This can be due to genetic makeup, metabolic rate is different, and things like that. And then you've also got different groups, so race or ethnic group. So unsurprisingly, because it is in the United States, primarily in the United States, the primary trial participants are white or Latinx, so or Hispanic or Latinx. I think Latinx is Latino but born in America. I think that's what it is. But again, I apologise if I got that terribly wrong. So there is one point here that I want to talk about in terms of race or ethnic group, which is important to kind of elaborate on, and I think more research needs to be done into it. So as you can see, most people are white and Latinx. You have a multi different populations here. Asian, Native Hawaiian, Native American are quite low, and I think getting more participants from those ethnic backgrounds will be very, very good to get good, accurate data, specifically looking at those specific groups. In the discussion, the trial says that it's not trying to distinguish, it's not trying to do independent analysis for different ethnic groups, but this initial one isn't, but they're doing more data on it. Seeing differences in different ethnic groups really provides additional power to the data. So it would have been good for them to do that. They can do it. They have the numbers to do it. You know, they could do analysis on 100 people, for example. It would just be better to get more if they could. So as you can see in the countries, primarily in the United States, they have some people from South Africa, but it only takes up like 2%. So again, looking at different countries and different responses will be particularly important. I think as the vaccine rolls out, there will obviously be side effects reported and things. This is an American-based company. Most of the participants are going to happen in America. That's just how it is. So another important point is the age group. So most people are within the ages of 16 to 55, so over 10,000 given either the placebo or the drug, so 20,000 in total. Interestingly, just over 7,000 people over the age of 55 were given the vaccine, so that's quite important. And then if you actually look at age of vaccination below that, you can see the median range, so not the average, but the median, so the most common age is 52 per group. So again, they've matched that, so it's age matched, which is really good. And then the range varies from 16 to 89 in the vaccine group, and then 16 to 91 in the placebo. So people that are like, you know, nearly 90 or 90 and above have been given the vaccine or the placebo. They can be very old. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the things that they're reported here and why these numbers are particularly important. And then finally, they look at BMI. So they look at a BMI over 30, which is clinically classified as being obese. So there is, I will talk about the drawback to that in a second, but they show that there's over 6,000 people given the placebo and the vaccine who were considered clinically obese. This is really important because it suggests that people that might have type 2 diabetes, heart disease, atherosclerosis, analysis is being done on people that might have those conditions for this vaccine. That's really important because it seems that people that are obese or overweight or have those other health complications are particularly at a higher risk, as well as the elderly, of dying from COVID. So that's a really important thing that they've included. That this study could have just done healthy young people, but they didn't. Many trials can often do healthy young people, and that's not a good representation of the public. This is better because it's showing you a range of people from the age of 16 to up to 91 and their effects in terms of vaccination. I think that's really powerful. I think that's really important. I've seen many studies done before, both in animals and in people, whereby they've used healthy people and it's not a good representation, or healthy young people and it's not a good representation of the entire population. This definitely does a better job of that. One thing I will note, obviously, about BMI, BMI is body mass index. It basically says how tall you are, how much you weigh, is a representation of whether you're obese or not. People that are bodybuilders, things like that, have a lot of muscle, they would have a high BMI. My suggestion is that most of these people weren't massively jacked, but some of those people will be outliers. But because they've got over 6,000 people per group, I think we've got a good indication that these are just people that are overweight. I also feel like in the discussion they'd probably exclude people that were really jacked up specifically for that reason. They probably use BMI as a specific to get a good indication as to whether someone might be overweight or obese. Okay, so start looking at the figures. So figure 2 here. Title says, local and systemic reactions reported within 7 days after injection of the vaccine or placebo according to different age groups. And they look at both dose 1 at day 1 and then dose 2 after 21 days. So let's look at the yellow. So data on local and systemic reactions and use of medication were collected with electronic diaries from participants in the reactogenicity subset, which is over 8,000 people, for 7 days after each vaccination. Pain at the injection site was assessed according to the following scale. So mild, which is green, does not interfere with activity. Moderate, which is blue, interferes with activity. Severe, which is like an orange or yellow, prevents daily activity. And then grade 4 is emergency department visit or hospitalization, which was red, but they didn't observe any of that. So if you can see from the initial local event data, so the first two graphs you see here are people aged 16 to 55. Top one is dose 1, and the bottom one is dose 2. So from left to right, the paired columns represent pain at the injection site, redness, and swelling. So if you see in this 16 to 55 age group, both at dose 1 and dose 2, pain at the injection site is easily the most common local side effect. Not surprising. This is an intramuscular injection, so I think it goes into the deltoid, which I think is your shoulder. So intramuscular injections can be painful. Unfortunately, I would argue that they're more painful than getting intravenous. So blood taking for me doesn't hurt, but it's quite enjoyable in a weird way. But intramuscular injections tend to have like a dull ache and pain and inflammatory and inflammation in that area, because immune cells, once you've damaged the muscle, because that's technically what a needle does, immune cells from the blood goes, it's attacked, and then they'll flood to the muscle and they'll start to cause later pain as well as that initial injection pain. So you can see that initial pain at the injection site is really common, and you see that in the 16 to 55 age group at dose 1 and dose 2, whereas the other side effects such as redness and swelling, whilst this is percentage on the y-axis by the way, whilst they do happen in the drug, people that are treated with the vaccine more than the placebo, it's still very, very low, 5 to 6%, 5 in every 100 people will probably get that, whereas local pain, 83 per 100 people will get that. That's not a surprising statistic. Local pain is common in vaccinations. So this seems to go down ever so slightly for the second dose, maybe because the participants have gone, I've done this before, I know what it feels like. And then sometimes people report pain because of the shock of the needle. So in the second dose, because they've already had it before, they kind of know what it feels like. If you compare that to people over the age of 55, it's not much different. If anything, people over the age of 55 have less pain at the injection site, and the redness and swelling again is also very low. People that are over the age of 55 probably get flu shots pretty regularly. They probably are used to that's intramuscular injection, so they're like, it doesn't hurt that much, so there's less pain, but there's still a lot. 71% per 100 people in the first dose and 66 per 100 people in the second dose. So that's just the acute local side effects that were reported. Next, they looked at systemic events and medication use, which is shown in panel B in the next figure. So fever categories are designated in the key. So what that basically means is fever was like, in green was mild, so 38 to 38.4, moderate, which is over 38.4 to 38.9, then severe, which is 38.9 to 40, and then grade 4 is hospitalization-based fever. So additional scales were as follows. So they looked at fatigue, headache, and chills, new or worsened muscle pain, new or worsened joint pain, whereby mild does not interfere with activity, moderate, there was some interference with activity, or severe, which prevents daily activity. Then you've got vomiting, so mild, 1 or 2 times in 24 hours, moderate, which is more than 2 times in 24 hours, or severe, which requires intravenous hydration. And then diarrhea, which is mild, 2 to 3 loose stools in 24 hours, moderate, 4 to 5 loose stools in 24 hours, or severe, 6 or more loose stools in 24 hours. And then grade 4 for all events indicated an emergency department visit or hospitalization. So let's go through this. It's quite a big graph, so I'm going to break it down by section. So at the bottom of the page, it gives you all the categories. So instead, I wanted to copy and paste these for each independent graph, so we could go through them one by one and you could see what's going on. So the first one, as you can see, this is systemic events and use of medication. So let's look at the first two together. So this is dose 1 and dose 2 in people that were the ages of 16 to 55. You can see there are a range of systemic side effects. Again, this isn't surprising for a vaccination. I really want to emphasize that. And the main ones are fatigue and headache. There is some muscle and joint pain and chills. And then again, fatigue and headache seem to go up on the second dose. So does chills, so does muscle pain, and so does joint pain. So there is this so generally, I think when you're going to if you take the vaccination, you are going to feel a bit shit. And some vaccinations you do. Some vaccinations can be horrible, but they work. So, great. But, you will feel crap for a couple of days, maybe a week. That's, because you're basically telling your immune system that you're infected. So you get an immune response, and it's that immune response which makes you feel like crap. So they also show pyretic use. So interestingly, in the first dose, 14% of people that had a placebo wanted a pyretic. So they thought they had a fever and they wanted a drug. So that's pretty interesting. People that took saline injection, 14% of those wanted placebo. 28% of people who took the vaccine wanted a pyretic. This went up to 45% in the second dose. So fever seems to be pretty common, or at least patients think they're going to get a fever, so they want maybe a pyretic as a preventative. Maybe they're worried based on the first dose that they're going, I could feel a bit crappy. Maybe I should get a pyretic just in case. And some people might ask for that. So pretty common side effects there. So fever, actually, despite the high pyretic use, not many people actually reported a fever, which makes me think that they were taking the drugs just in case one came on, but didn't. So, I actually can't remember if they asked for the pyretic after a fever came on or if they could take it before. So that obviously mixes that up a little bit, but actually reported fevers were very low. Normally it's the fevers that can feel horrible. Chills particularly aren't very nice either. So if you actually look at people over the age of 55, there are a couple of fascinating points here. So side effects overall are less in people that are elderly. This for me is really important, because side effects in the elderly can feel considerably worse than side effects in the young. Specifically if you've got, you've already got your aches and pains and you might have arthritis and things like that. And do you really want joint and muscle pain when you're already all achy all over the place? I don't think so. It'd be far less enjoyable for that person. So I think seeing lower side effects for those patients is particularly pertinent, and you can see lower pyretic use as well, which is pretty awesome. But again, lower drug use might be because these people are probably used to having vaccinations and how it feels, so probably more used to the pain, or they might have other aches and pains and stuff, and they're like, I'm used to this. I don't need another drug. So pretty interesting stuff. So vomiting barely happens at any point. So like 1 to 2% reported. Again, diarrhea very low, but can happen. But yeah, the most common of these side effects across all groups, and it's consistent for dose 1, dose 2 between the people at the 16 to 55 and people over the age of 55, is fatigue, headache, chills, muscle pain, and joint pain. So pretty consistent and pretty interesting stuff. Summary, no participant reported grade 4 local reaction. Nobody. So nobody had to be hospitalized because of a local reaction to the injection. So that's pretty cool stuff, considering they injected 40 plus thousand people. Obviously it was split 50-50 with vaccine and placebo, but no reported hospitalization because of that. That's pretty cool. The text basically summarizes the figures I've gone over, so I'm not going to do that for systemic reactogenicity. I'm just going to talk about the final parts of that. So 2 participants, each in the vaccine and the placebo groups, reported temperatures above 40 degrees. A temperature of 40 degrees, you will feel horrendous. But let me emphasize this. 2 people in the vaccine group and 2 people in the placebo group both developed fevers of 40 plus. Could they have had another infection, and that's why they developed the fever? Suggestions that it's not due to the actual vaccination itself. It could be it could be a placebo fever. Very strange, but maybe they caught an infection. That could be something that happened, but something to note there. Younger vaccine recipients were more likely to use antipyretic or pain medication, so as I've discussed already. So, systemic events including fever and chills were observed with the first 1 or 2 days after vaccination and resolved shortly thereafter. So at least if you get a fever, you don't have to sit there with it for too long. And then daily use of the electronic diary. So these patients were reporting their side effects in an electronic diary. There's obviously worry that patient compliance with these sorts of things, but they report that patient compliance for each day after the first dose was 90 to 93%. So after the first dose, this did drop to from 75 to 83% after the second dose. So that's a bit of variation that you obviously need to keep in mind. People can't be asked to do stuff, but there's still pretty high compliance considering 60% of the population 40% of the population just choose not to vote. So that's pretty good, I would say, for compliance of a trial. So let's talk about the adverse events section now. And 6 placebo recipients reported something called lymphadenopathy. So what the fuck is that? So lymphadenopathy is a fancy word for saying you have swollen lymph nodes. So if you've ever had any form of serious infection, you'll often get like pain here and here, sometimes on the back of your necks as well. These are lymph nodes. These are hubs for white blood cells called lymphocytes, whereby they go in there, they multiply, they get ready for action, and then they go spread around your body. That's why they swell up. So having lymphadenopathy is not uncommon, especially when you're having the vaccine. Okay, so you're having a vaccine which produces a spike protein for a virus. It's going to facilitate an immune response. Hence why lymphadenopathy side effects were more common in people that had the vaccine. It's nothing serious there. So next, they had 4 related serious adverse events which were reported among vaccine recipients. So only 4 people, but because they're serious, they obviously need to be reported, but don't mistake the wood from the trees in this regard. Is only 4 people. Some people had adverse reactions to everything. So they reported a couple of serious adverse reactions. So firstly, shoulder injury related to vaccine administration. So they could have had serious shoulder pain, serious bruising. That could have been something associated with the nurse and how it was administered. It doesn't necessarily have to be associated with the vaccine. That's important to note. Also, right axillary lymphadenopathy. So right axillary basically just means right side swollen lymph nodes, I think here. That's what that means. They're just like putting complicated scientific terms on it. And then finally, proximal ventricular arrhythmia. So that's a type of heart arrhythmia. So that's obviously that's a serious side effect, especially if someone has a heart condition. If you get that in a heart condition, that could kill you. However, I will emphasize that if you have a heart condition and you're getting coronavirus, that will probably kill you too. So this is, one person in the entire study got this side effect. We don't know based on this if they were obese. Again, I would have liked to have known that. Was the person who got this, or are they allowed to tell us? There might be some patient signing thing that they can't inform us about that initially, but something to note for sure. But that is obviously a serious side effect, and I won't shy away from that. But it's one person that got that in the entire trial. That's pretty amazing, really. And then finally, right leg paresthesia. So paresthesia is an abnormal skin reaction. This can be tingling, prickling, chilling, and numbness. Sometimes if you get trapped nerve, for example, you can get this like prickling and tingling feeling. That's called paresthesia. So neurons could be being stimulated in those parts of the body based on the immune response. That can happen. Doesn't mean it's a permanent thing. It can be a temporary thing. It's like getting pins and needles, for example, if you sit on your hand too long or whatever, or if you wake up a bit funny. Generally it goes away after time. So, excuse me. So that seems to be the most severe adverse reactions that they reported, and there were only 4 that were reported among the vaccine candidates. Doesn't mean it was associated primarily with the vaccine. It just develops over that period, but it could be. So that's important to note. This is the thing that people are obviously going to highlight the most. So 2 recipients of the vaccine died. Okay, so one from arteriosclerosis. So this is basically when it's like similar to atherosclerosis, where you get like plaque build up in arteries. It can basically result in a blood clot. And then another from cardiac arrest, which is basically a heart attack. So 2 people with the vaccine who administered the vaccine died. That's going to take headlines. Next sentence emphasizes, well, you need to read the entire thing. Next sentence actually says that 4 people that received the placebo died. So the fatality rate amongst those who received a saline injection was double that for those who received the vaccine. Okay, so and the people that died in the placebo group, 2 were from unknown. They don't know what caused their deaths. One was from hemorrhagic stroke. So this is when a blood vessel bursts, in comparison to an ischemic stroke. Ischemic stroke is a clot. Hemorrhagic strokes often result from an aneurysm bursting, which is like a weakening of a blood vessel. It bulges and it bursts. And then one from myocardial infarction. So one from cardiac arrest, again, it's basically a heart. Or cardiac arrest is, as I was talking about. So one from, so the person who got the vaccine, one died from cardiac arrest. Is basically the heart just stopped working. And then one of the patients who died from the placebo group had what's called a myocardial infarction. So that is called a heart attack. Cardiac arrest is just when the heart stops for whatever reason. And myocardial infarction is the scientific lingo for saying that someone had an active heart attack. So, emphasis, no deaths were considered by the investigators to be related to the vaccine or placebo. So no COVID-19 associated deaths were observed. So these deaths were likely associated with other complications. There were 12,000 people that are obese, okay, so in this study. So someone having a heart attack, a hemorrhagic stroke, or dying from arteriosclerosis isn't really that surprising in that group. I would have liked them to specifically say that they died in that group if that was the case. But, vaccines were given to people up to the age of 91. If someone's not going to die out of 40-something thousand people in that period, then, wow, they're aging very well. So interesting points in terms of safety. I will emphasise this final point here in this safety section before talking about it in the discussion. They say that safety monitoring will continue for 2 years. 2 years after administration of the second dose of the vaccine. So people have been talking about chronic side effects of the vaccine. So the obvious thing is that the vaccine is to come out ASAP. We need a vaccine. They can't wait 2 years until they've got all of the safety data before they make it available, because old people, other vulnerable populations are going to die because of it. So they have provided this preliminary short-term safety data, which is enough for FDA to provide emergency approval. And they emphasize this in the paper. Look, there's going to be more side effect studies done on this, and they're going to have a follow-up for the people that had the vaccine. I think that's really important. So before you read like news headlines about, it's not safe, actually read the study. Read the initial study and what they're going to do to actually rectify that and actually provide more information about its safety. So now we're going to move on to another efficacy section. So among 36,000 participants who had no evidence of existing prior COVID infection, 8 cases of COVID were with onset at least 7 days after the second dose were observed among vaccine recipients, and 162 among placebo recipients. So much more common in people who had the placebo versus the COVID vaccine, suggesting it is effective 7 days post second dose. So pretty cool, fantastic insight. Seems particularly beneficial in that population. So vaccine efficacy among participants with hypertension was analysed separately, again because hypertension seems to be associated with increased risk of death. was, yes, it was analysed separately, but was consistent with the other subgroup analyses which they did, which is really important, suggesting people that with pre-existing conditions such as hypertension is effective both in those patients as well. So there are other things here. So figure 3 is quite a complicated graph, but I'm just going to basically talk about it and quickly show it. It's hard for me to follow, so but I think I kind of understand it. So figure 3 shows cases of COVID-19 or severe COVID-19 with onset at any time after the first dose, between the first dose and the second dose. Okay, so before they had their second dose, 39 cases in the vaccine group and 82 cases in the placebo group were observed. So this basically says that the vaccine can actually be beneficial in people that have only had one injection, but it's not as effective as a 2-dose regimen. So if you actually go down to the graph, you can see in the blue is basically COVID infections in placebo after dosing, and all the dark squares basically represent infection times. So if you see in the first dose of the BNT, there's only a couple of dark dots suggesting that infection after only one dose is far less than that who receives the placebo, just saying that, look, even one dose of this vaccine is effective, but we recommend having a 2-dose regimen. So that's the data. So we're now just going to quickly look at the discussion. Again, this is massive. It's a big study. It's important. It's not big in length, but it's big in importance. So I really wanted to kind of emphasize some of the points I've gone through. So now we're just going to talk about the discussion section. The discussion section is where the reporters and the experimenters talk about the research they've done and what's good about it and how it can be improved and what they're going to be doing next. So the discussion. First part I highlight, they say the following. Although the study was not powered to definitively assess efficacy by subgroup, the point estimates of efficacy for subgroups based on age, sex, race, ethnicity, body mass index, or the presence of an underlying condition associated with a high risk of COVID-19 complications are also high. Oh, it's a big sentence. So basically saying, like, look, we haven't done individual analysis of these different subgroups, and it wasn't designed for that purpose. Further research will do that, but they're basically showing that, look, it's effective in all of these different subgroups. In terms of ethnicity, they need to get more people in those different ethnic groups. Having like 50 people from Hawaii or whatever it was isn't enough as a good representation for their entire population. Same like Native Indians, Pacific Islanders, etc. They need more data on that. But again, because it's an American-based company, you may not have you could get more Native Indians to do these sorts of studies. It's just how do you reach them? Are they on clinical trial databases, things like that? So while the things like BMI was good because they had a lot of people in the study that were clinically indicators as being obese based on their BMI, it suggests that the vaccine works for them. And they've done sex, so they've done they've separated male and women numbers 50%. So and then 50% of males got the vaccine and then the placebo, and then 50% of the females got the vaccine and placebo. That's very good. But there are a couple of you could add more numbers of people for some of those different groups which had low representation numbers in the actual study itself. But otherwise pretty interesting. Furthering on from this, so the study was also not designed to assess the efficacy of a single dose regimen. So they were always going in with a 2-dose protocol in mind. However, they did note that the interval between the first and second doses, the observed vaccine efficacy against COVID was 52% in the first 7 days after dose 2, and it was 91% reaching full efficacy against disease with onset at least 7 days after dose 2. So after your second dose, they say that it'd be 52% effective if you get infected within 7 days. Okay, so basically 7 days after your jab, second dose, you want to be careful. You don't want to expose yourself to too many people. Don't go running around going, oh, I'm immune, because it's not necessarily true. But after 7 days, it's 91% effective, so that's pretty cool. The favourable testing, so next section, the favourable safety profile observed during phase 1 testing of the vaccine was confirmed in their phase 2-3 portion of the trial. No real severe adverse drug reactions were associated with the vaccine. Some people did have adverse reactions, so one person had an arrhythmia. That could potentially not be associated with the vaccine itself. It was only one person. They have reported it. It's not like they've hidden it. So one person in 40 plus thousand for that is pretty incredible. So they note that severe fatigue was observed in approximately 4% of recipients of the vaccine, which is higher than that observed in recipients of some vaccines recommended for older adults. So something that GPs obviously need to keep in mind, if an older person already suffers with severe fatigue, this vaccine might not be the not be the wisest choice, because it might contribute to even more fatigue in those patients, which could potentially cause some complications for them. So that's something to note, and they've talked about that here. They've also provided a reference to other vaccines which kind of link to this point. And this rate of severe fatigue is also lower than that observed in recipients of another approved viral vaccine for older adults. Basically saying, like, look, it may cause severe fatigue, but there are other vaccines which are approved which cause more fatigue than this one, that are already licensed and available for people that are older. So pretty transparent. So next they say lymphadenopathy, which generally resolved within 10 days, is likely to have resulted from a robust vaccine-elicited immune response, as I've already said. And then they say the incidence of serious adverse events was similar in the vaccine and the placebo group. So 0.6% in the vaccine group, 0.5% in the placebo group, respectively. So when you're looking at side effects, you always need to do a direct comparison between the control and the drug treatment. So in this case, the vaccine and the placebo, and you can see there's not real much a difference between those. When you take into consideration standard error and statistics and standard deviation and things, it's probably no difference between them. So in pink, this trial and its preliminary report have several limitations. Every study will always have this section, and I really want to emphasize that. So if you actually read the original studies that news articles and other things come from, they'll talk about this, and they've done so here. So let's go through that, and then we'll finish up this massive video. Although the study was designed to follow participants for safety and efficacy for 2 years after the second dose, given the high vaccine efficacy, ethical and practical barriers prevent following placebo recipients for 2 years without offering active immunization once the vaccine is approved by regulators and recommended by public health authorities. Basically saying, like, look, we're going to look at the side effects of the people that got the vaccine over a 2-year period, but it's not ethical for us to do the same for the placebo group. The reason is that you can't tell that placebo group of 20,000+ people that they can't get the vaccine for COVID for 2 years. It's just not ethical. So what they're basically saying is, like, look, we're going to offer them the vaccine if they want it. If they don't want it, then maybe we can follow them. But the ethical barriers associated with that when it becomes available globally, so obviously comes in the way of that. So basically saying, like, look, the assessment of long-term safety and efficacy for this vaccine will still occur, but it cannot be in the context of maintaining a placebo group for the planned follow-up period of 2 years after the second dose. It means they can't do direct comparisons against placebos. They also note that these data do not address whether vaccination prevents asymptomatic infection. So they've been looking at symptoms of infection. So they don't know if this vaccine, based on this initial study that they put out, whether the vaccine is effective in asymptomatic people. It's obviously quite a big thing. Therefore, they don't know definitively if it prevents transmission. But they do know that it prevents people getting symptomatic. It prevents people from getting symptomatic COVID, is what they're basically saying. However, they are doing a serologic experiment. Serologic basically means, like, look, they're looking for antigens in the blood, i.e. looking for the virus, etc. And they're doing endpoints for those at the moment, just to say, like, look, does this vaccine prevent the virus getting in the blood in the first place? Just because the virus is in the blood doesn't mean you necessarily will get symptoms. But they're doing that experiment, and they're currently updating that. But they obviously just getting this initial. Again, this is this paper was for emergency approval by the FDA in the United States. So emergency approval will be for people that get severe symptoms and therefore will be at risk of getting severe symptoms. Therefore, they want to prevent that. So they're just saying, like, yeah, we'll look at this serologic analysis data later, and it will be published as they've mentioned. So they then go and said, this report does not address the prevention of COVID in other populations, such as younger adolescents, children, and pregnant women. So they're going to be reporting safety and immune response data in these young children and pregnant women at a later date, but this data doesn't actually include data on them. So again, talk to if you are pregnant or you are, you have kids under that age who want potentially to get vaccinated, it's important to talk to your GP about this as to whether it's a good idea. Maybe you should wait for the data to come out about pregnancy and these young children before you go ahead and get vaccinated. But if you are in a high risk group of infection and you need to get the vaccine, then you obviously need to consolidate a healthcare professional and see what is the best course of action. The vaccine can be stored up to 5 days. Standard refrigerator temperatures once ready for use. Very cold temperatures are required for shipping and longer storage, so minus 70 degrees Celsius, I think. They're pretty standard freezers in biological labs because it's how we store all our tissues and our drugs and things. So, for example, at the University of Arizona, we're going to be storing a lot of the vaccine because we have more freezers than the surrounding medical centres. So the current cold storage requirements may be alleviated by ongoing stability studies and formulation optimization, which may also be described in subsequent reports. So they're currently ongoing to try and find a more stable alternative formation of the vaccine, which doesn't require such cold temperatures, and they're currently working on that actively. So that's pretty cool. And then, the development of the vaccine was initiated on the 10th of January 2020, so almost a year ago, and this was when the genetic sequence of the virus was released by the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention and disseminated globally by something called the GISED, which is the Global Initiative on Sharing All Influenza Data. Let me emphasize this. Global sharing of scientific data is a very rare commodity. Scientists are very worried about sharing their data, even at conferences, because they're worried that their data and their research is going to be poached by a bigger research group. So it's particularly worrying for example, when I was doing my PhD, it was just me in the lab. I was very worried if I gave too much away, someone with more money and a bigger lab would just do what I'm doing and do it faster. Because this is a global emergency, organisations and research groups have actively shared their data. So if one person finds something that doesn't work, another group doesn't just go doing the same thing and they don't waste their time. They actively look for other approaches. So sharing of the genetic sequence has allowed the development of the RNA vaccine in the first place, and they've shared it with every research group that's working on it. It's pretty incredible and really like groundbreaking work for science, really. So the continuous phase 1, 2, 3 trial design may provide a model that reduce the protracted development timelines that have delayed the availability of vaccines against other infectious diseases of medical importance. And this is just how they've got around starting the vaccine process and the trial process without jumping through all of these crazy hoops that you normally have to do when you do independent phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 applications. What they've done here is application for all three at once and then done them in succession, which is obviously sped up the process. So that's basically the summary. I obviously want to look at the appendix and the people that are involved. So the authors and affiliations, obviously a lot of people here work for Pfizer and a couple for BioNTech, which is the sponsor for the trial. But there's also a couple of people here that work in hospitals and research institutions. So Cincinnati Children's Hospital, for example, and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School for Public Health. So in collaboration with people that work at hospitals and be able to give access to people that might want to be involved in these trials. So that's the paper. So a lot of stuff to digest, a lot of information. I apologise for this being really long. I don't expect you to watch the whole thing. Put it on in your headphones if you want, that's what I'd recommend maybe. I'm going to upload it to YouTube as well as Facebook, so it's up to you how you want to digest it. I hope it's helpful. Reading papers can be a bit tricky at some times. I've read them for 8 years. We have to do one. We read one as a lab group every couple of weeks and we discuss it and we pick it apart because it's good practice, especially in the scientific community, to really analyse data, learn what it means, how could it be better. So I do this as a part of my job. So it's reading them over time, consistently reading them is definitely helpful. But to the untrained eye, it can be quite complicated to kind of go over. So I hope some of this information is more helpful to you. I hope you've learned something. I hope you understand more about the trial itself. Overall, I think the data is pretty strong. Based on this and my health, I would take it. I would take the vaccine based on this data. So because it's an RNA vaccine, I'm convinced that any long-term, I don't think there will be any serious long-term effects because it's just literally nucleotides, which our body is full of. So I don't think that will be a problem. So that's just my opinion on it, based on, I'm a pharmacologist. I learn about pharmacokinetics and like distribution and metabolism of drugs as a part of what I do. It's very important in terms of what I do. So I think this is a good vaccine candidate. I think it's a very strong paper, study, trial, hence why it's published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So I hope this was very helpful. I hope you took something away from it. I hope you enjoy your week. I hope you, for whatever reason, decide to watch this whole thing and share it around, because that will be great. So look after yourselves. Have a fantastic Christmas, and I will speak to you guys soon.